All right, class. I'm going to show you how to make a pumpkin rattle. This is a pumpkin rattle sample that I made last year. This is another pumpkin rattle sample that I made. Um, one of the characteristics of a rattle is that it makes noise. And so I'm going to show you how to make these forms, and also I'm going to show you um, how to make the rattle sound inside and how to make a stem that's a handle. Okay, so I'm going to set these aside for a moment, and you're going to need several tools to do this. You will not need your yardsticks. You will not need your roller at all. You will, however, probably need your fork, or you'll need a fork. If you have a fork at home, you can use a fork to score. Also, you'll need your knife, which I gave you a knife. You'll need your bamboo skewer, definitely. And I did not give you any of my wooden spoons because they were really hard to find. It was hard for me to get 30 wooden spoons. But if you have a wooden spoon at home, you can use a wooden spoon when you're making this rattle, okay? Um, I apologize for not giving you a wooden spoon, but this is the only project that we need the spoon for, and I really didn't want those to go out and disappear and not come back. So you can use a wooden spoon from your drawer. Just make sure that it's clean before you use it, and also make sure that you soak it so that you get all the clay out of it, because you don't want somebody to be cooking with it and eating clay once you're done using it. Okay, so um, you have a bag of clay, and again, remember, we're not handling clay until the actual time when you're working with it, because it dries up the more you handle it. So you have 4 little balls of clay in here, and they should be fairly moist. The clay that I bought this time around was it was not quarantine clay. It hadn't been sitting in a warehouse, so it's a little bit softer. It was very pliable as I put it in the bags. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take a little pinch off of this bigger ball that's right here, and also a little teeny pinch off the smaller ball, and you're going to make yourself a slip pot. Right? And remember, we're just making a little tiny pinch pot. Just a little tiny pinch pot. You're going to set it flat, and you're going to pour a little bit of water into it. And I'm going to pull it a little bit further to off camera so it's out of my way. And I'm only filling it with just a little teeny smidge of water. Ah! Well, I was only filling it with a little teeny smidge of water. I'm going to mop that up. Bloop. With my shirt. All right, there we go. Good enough. Okay. So you just want to put a little bit of water in here. Remember, anytime you attach 2 pieces of clay together, the clay has to be roughed up, which is called scoring, and you have to add a little bit of this liquid. It looks just like water, but what's happening is there's a little bit of clay mixing in with it, and that's going to make a glue. It's actually making glue on my desk right now. So it's going to make a glue for your pieces to stick together. So the way that you start out with a rattle is you're going to take a little piece of paper. And I'm going to give you a little piece of paper when you come to pick up your bag. So you're going to take a piece of paper and you're going to wrinkle it up. You really want it to be nice and wrinkly and soft. So I'm doing this, and I'm wrinkling the bag or the paper, and I'm wrinkling it a lot. I want it to be really wrinkled. I want the paper to be really soft and pliable. So this paper is going to actually burn off in the kiln. The paper is the secret ingredient to make your rattle actually rattle. So you're going to take your paper, ball it up, make it really soft so that it's no longer, it's more like fabric and not as much like paper, right? You want it to be really soft. And once it's really soft and wrinkly, then it's perfect for what we're going to do next. So I'm going to take the smallest ball. You had two balls that were exactly the same size. Then you had one that was a little bit bigger. And then you had a little tiny one. To make your bowl, you took a pinch off of this one and a pinch off of this one. You're going to take this little ball and you're going to pull off some little pieces and you're going to roll up little teeny balls. The smaller you make them, the more high-pitched your rattle. I don't want to make them too small because a rattle has to have a hole in the bottom. So you can see that my rattle has a hole in the bottom right here. And you don't want the clay pieces to fall out. So on this one, you can see this is my hole at the bottom. So I want my rattle pieces to be bigger than the hole. My hole's a little bit bigger on this rattle, this pumpkin rattle. However, the pieces that are inside are a lot bigger than this hole. So if I'm punching my hole with this stick, my pieces have to be a little bit, in fact, I'm going to make them even a little bit bigger because I don't want all of them to fall out. And that's what will happen to them. They will fall out. So I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger. So I am putting them on the little piece of paper. And this is what's going to make the rattle sound because when these go into the kiln, they're going to get hard. And the inside of the pumpkin is also going to vitrify. It's going to lose all of the water. It's going to get a lot harder in texture. So I don't need all of this clay to do this. And in fact, I'm going to probably save. I've only used like about this much. So I'm going to save out this little ball and I'm going to use it for my handle. So I'm going to have about that many, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it right here on the one little ball that's left. Okay? This needs to get set aside and saved in a safe place where it doesn't get smushed. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to very carefully make 2 pinch pots. Now, the process of making a pinch pot involves me pressing my 2 thumbs. I'm holding the ball of clay with these fingers and I'm pushing my 2 thumbs in. So I've pushed my 2 thumbs in. You can see that I've made a hole. And I'm going to turn and push. Turn and push. Turn and push. So my 2 thumbs are just doing the pushing. So you can see, trying to turn this right towards the camera. You can see, and I'm just feeling, one of the things I like to do is I like to close my eyes so that I am only feeling the thickness. I'm not looking at what I'm doing. And when I feel a spot that's too thick, if I feel a spot that's too thick, I attack it and thin it out. Okay, so what I don't want to do is have a pinch pot that's super wide open and flat. I want to have it be more shaped like a cone with less of an opening. You're going to have a lot of trouble if you make a pinch pot that's super wide open and super flat. It's not going to make a good rattle and you're going to be frustrated. So I'm being really careful to keep this part narrow. When I'm done and I feel like it is of even thickness, feels pretty good, I'm going to set it down like this. I don't want to set it down on the end because I don't want to smash the end. I want it to look like a pumpkin, and a pumpkin has a curved shape. So if I just plunk it down on the table, it doesn't have a curved shape anymore. It's going to have a flat bottom, and we don't want it to have a flat bottom. Now, this is exactly the same size. I tried really carefully to make sure that you had two that were the same size, because what we're going to do is put them together to make the pumpkin, right? So I'm going to make my second pinch pot. Again, I'm using these fingers, holding it on the bottom, and they're going to be turning it like this while my fingers are punching the hole. It's kind of like a pottery wheel in many ways, right? So I am making the hole, and again, I'm keeping my hands pretty close together. The wider you put your hands, the wider the hole's going to be, and you're going to have a flat pinch pot. So you want to keep your hands, my thumbs are almost vertical. So see how my thumbs are really close to each other. On the first one, I didn't keep them close to each other, but this one I want to do that. If you get air pockets inside, just crush the air bubble out, or you can poke it with your stick tool. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit closer to what I want. You don't want to get it too thin, because if you get it too thin, it's gonna crumple. So you want it to be thick enough that it can kind of support itself. All right, so I'm kind of cleaning it up. I'm feeling any spots where it's too thick, and I'm making sure that it's not thick in any places. Okay. Now, again, I'm not going to set this down like that on the desk because I don't want to smush it. I'm going to set it down gently. And ideally, what you probably want to do, you kind of want to make sure they're about the same size too. Ideally, what you want to do is let them sit for a bit. Like if I'm in my clay shed and I use double pinch pots to make a lot of different things. Sometimes I make giant clay beads, and what I will do is I will let them sit for a minute and just kind of firm up so the clay can kind of rest a little bit. So I'm going to let mine sit for just a minute. I'm going to have a little drink of lime juice, limeade. And I'm going to want to make some sort of stem on my pumpkin. If you look up pictures of pumpkins, they have an interesting stem that's almost shaped like a star. So if I take this and I start kind of, while these are firming up, I'm kind of working on my stem. I'm flattening it on my desk and making it kind of looks a little bit like a ghost. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my finger to kind of press in. I'll post some pictures of pumpkins so that you can look at them. But I'm going to use my finger to kind of give the stem its star shape on the bottom. And they kind of have a little bit of a pointy star quality to them, right? So they kind of look like I've got a little bit of a star shape on here. right? Like if it's kind of a flat star, but it's a star nonetheless. So you can kind of see. And I've just used my fingers again. My thumb was pressed in. Your hands are your best tools. Um, if you do have a spoon, sometimes you can do kind of things like this and, use the spoon to make that a little bit more pronounced. So the star's a little bit more of a star now that I use the spoon. And I don't like to see lines, work lines, or finger marks or fingerprints. So I like to kind of clean off. And if you need to put a little bit of water on your finger to clean it off so that it's really smooth. Pumpkins tend to have kind of curly stems. So I'm going to curl mine around. So now my pinch pots were drying, and I have my stem pretty well worked out on my pumpkin. So now it's really important that I'm really careful when I handle these. So I'm going to take my fork and I'm just going to gently score. If you don't want to use your fork, if you're afraid to use your fork, you can use this tool, the pokey tool, and you can just gently score. It's up to you. Each one has to be scored. So what we're basically doing is we're going to make a balloon. There's going to be an air pocket in here, and the air pocket is going to have this little paper packet inside of it. And one of the tricky things about having an air pocket is that when you put it in the kiln, it will explode if you have an air pocket. So we're going to make sure that we're going to punch a hole in the bottom, and we'll get to that at the very end. So now I have both of these. I have scored them. I'm going to use just a little bit of water. I'm just putting a little bit of water. I don't think you need to put it on both. I think if you put water on one, you're fine. And then you're going to take this packet. Don't forget the packet, otherwise it won't rattle. It will just be a pumpkin. You're going to fold it gently. What you don't want to do is squish these together really tight. If you squish them together really tight, what will happen is they'll dry together and they'll make one big ball. And then your pumpkin won't rattle, it will thud. So you want to be super gentle. If you don't put the paper in, if you just throw these into your clay, sometimes what happens is they stick. They stick to the inside wall of your rattle and then they don't rattle. In fact, 90% of the time, if you just put it in without the paper, it sticks to the clay and then it doesn't rattle. So this is my little secret. Don't tell anybody. It's my little secret for keeping it from sticking. And so I am super gentle. You saw me. This looked like I was diffusing a bomb. I was really careful. I'm going to set it carefully in here. And then I'm going to put the top on. And then I'm going to join these together. Okay, and I don't want to let any of the air out. Think of this as being like a balloon. You don't want to let the air out. So I've just put the two halves together, but that looks like a peach instead of like a pumpkin. And also it doesn't have a nice tight seal. So I'm going to take my fingers really gently without any water on them, and I'm just going to push one side to the other side, back and forth. Like I'm just going to clean that up so I don't see the joint where they're joined. So can you see how the joint has disappeared? So we want to really make that joint disappear. So I don't want to be able to even see that where I hooked the two pieces together. I want it to just look like a hollow ball. right? So I'm kind of smoothing. I push some of it to one side, I push the other to the other side, and my hands are not wet. If you get your hands wet and you start doing that, it makes it really difficult. It's almost better to have the clay drier when you're doing that. So I'm just attaching, I'm basically getting a nice tight seal so that I've sealed the balloon. All I have left is this little part that I'm going to pull across. I pull it one way across and then I pull it the other way across. And I just use my hands to gently sort of massage the clay to where I want it to go. So I'm just going kind of back and forth, sealing the balloon. Now, this looks like a weird sort of orange. And we don't want an orange rattle. It's fall, so we want it to look like a pumpkin, right? So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to use my fingers to kind of shape it like a pumpkin. So I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to kind of run my finger in a little groove like that. Then I'm going to do that across. You have to be really careful that you don't have a wet finger when you're doing this. If this gets really wet, it will collapse. And then I also can use the back of a wooden spoon. You don't want to use the front part of the wooden spoon because this little curve, when you're tapping it, this little curve will leave a mark. You want to use the back side of the wooden spoon. And I'm just going to gently tap it. I'm hardly pressing at all. I just want to get rid of some of the fingerprints and shapes that I put into it when I was sealing it. And also when I made the pinch pot. You're not punishing the rattle. You're not beating the tar out of the rattle. Listen to the sound. Right? It's not whack, 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 whack. It's tap, 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 tap. It sounds like a butterfly is jumping up and down. You know, not like you're using a battering ram to knock down a door. This is very meditative and it's very enjoyable. And so you have to know when to stop using the spoon. You can sit and whack it, but what you'll end up doing is you'll collapse it. So you have to be, even though it's kind of fun, you have to stop yourself at a certain point and say, okay, no more whacking. If you were in class and you were using my wooden spoons, sometimes I walk by and I'll just take it away from someone. Let's take your spoon away because you've collapsed it. It's easy to push too hard and make it collapse, and you don't want to have that happen. What you're doing with the paddling is you're just getting a nice, clean, round, consistent shape. I'm paddling out all of the weird finger marks from my pinch pot, and I'm smoothing them away so that it looks more like an organic pumpkin shape. Okay, and I'm stopping, and now I'm going to put another crease in so that it looks pumpkin-y. And I'm using a little bit of water. I shouldn't, but I got a little bit of dry clay on there. And then I'm using another finger, putting my other finger in. So you're just kind of using your finger, and I'm using the whole length of my finger, right? I'm kind of going like this because pumpkins have those creases, right? So you're just using your finger. And again, you got to be careful because if you're pressing too hard when you're doing any of this, you can collapse the air pocket that's inside. If you do collapse the air pocket that's inside, take your clay, put it back in the bag, put a little teeny bit of water in the bag, and just set it aside and work on it later. Okay, because what you really don't want to do is just collapse it so that it doesn't rattle. And if your clay is too um, too overworked, just take a break, put it back in the bag, let your clay kind of have a rest. It's very easy to collapse it. I'm being super gentle, and hopefully you will be too, but sometimes kids aren't as gentle. They kind of go crazy and hit it hard. So now I'm just kind of smoothing it. You can see I kind of have, it actually looks kind of more tomatoey. So um, I kind of maybe want to add a little bit more crease to it. So I'm just adding a little bit more to it. You can use the end of the spoon, but again, you got to be really careful that you don't press super hard, because if you do, you can collapse it. But the end of the spoon sometimes works as well as your finger for doing that. Again, don't press hard. I'm just doing it really lightly. Really lightly. And really lightly. If you start to see cracks, again, just put your clay back in the bag, give it a rest. Clay will reach a point where it's kind of overworked. So dough is the same thing if you've ever made bread, or if you've ever made tortillas, or if you've ever made any kind of baking. Dough kind of does the same thing. Like, it can get overworked, and then you just set it aside and it kind of calms down. It just needs a little rest. You've kind of manhandled it too much. You can give it a rest. Okay, so I have something that looks like this from up above. Looks very pumpkin-y from the sides. And I've also smoothed it out. Do not get your finger in the water and just start smoothing, because that will weaken the walls and it will collapse. So smoothing doesn't necessarily always have to be done with water. I'm being really careful not to sit my pumpkin on the water that I spilled, so I don't want it to stick. So now I'm kind of setting it down. I want it to be able to sit flat. So I do want a little bit of a flat bottom on it. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to score the top, because this is where I want to put my handle. You really want to score the handle and make sure it's on there. When somebody picks up a rattle, their instinct is to pick it up by the handle. I made these, and so I know the handles could fall off, so I don't ever pick mine up by the handles, but everybody else does. So you want to make sure that you really score the stem and you score the pumpkin, so that you don't have someone holding a stem and the pumpkin has fallen on the ground. So I'm going to make sure that I really score the handle part, and I'm scoring the pumpkin part. And then I'm going to put a little bit of water on one, and I'm going to go like this and just, I'm holding it to steady it, but I'm really pressing it in. I'm making sure that it gets, like, I can wiggle waggle it and that it's really on there. Right? Like, I've gone like this and kind of wiggled it so it's in place. Uh-oh, lights went off. So I have this from the side. It looks pretty good. And now what I'm going to do before I walk away, is I don't need this anymore. And I might want to make a leaf on the side of my pumpkin. And I don't like to waste clay, because clay is $18 a bag. So I don't waste clay. I'm always really thrifty with my clay. And also because clay is permanent and we don't want to waste it, right? So I'm going to take my water and I'm going to put a little bit right here because I want 2 leaves. So I'm going to put something over here and then I'm going to pour out my water. I'm going to score right here and I'm going to score right here. And I've already put my water on it, and now I'm just rolling it out in my hands, my little slip cup. I'm putting it in my hands and working it in my hands to dry all the water, right? Now, I might want to make, pumpkins sometimes have, they grow on a vine, and so sometimes they have a thing that kind of looks like a vine. So I'm going to roll out a vine. Do not make it super 3D, right? Because if you do, it'll break off. But I'm just going to make like a little thing that looks like a vine that's kind of a twirl. And I'm going to attach it to the side, right? So I'm going to pop it in right here. And I'm going to score it before I do that. It already has water. So I'm going to score it in here. So I have a little vine. And then I'm also going to make a leaf. Now, pumpkin leaves are kind of, they're kind of leaves that have pokey ends. So I'm going to make pokey ends. So I'm kind of making a leaf shape. And you can go online before you do this and you can look up what pumpkin leaves look like. This probably doesn't look too much like a pumpkin leaf. Looks more like a star. And then I'm going to flatten it out a little bit. I don't have my roller, but I'm just going to use my spoon handle, because that's way too thick for a leaf. Leaves are pretty thin. So I'm kind of making a bit of a leaf. I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to put a leaf line in it, and I'm going to make a leaf line going out. And I don't like how that looks, so I'm going to use the top part of my knife because it's wider. And then I'm going to kind of curl it a little bit so it kind of looks more leafy. Right, and then I'm going to attach it where I put my scoring in my water before, and I'm going to score this. I don't want it to fall off, and so you're always going to slip and score. My water has dried up a little bit, so I'm going to use a little bit from my desk. There's a reason why I made a big mess. And I want my leaf to actually stay on, so I'm going to really make it kind of flat against the pumpkin. And actually that leaf looks pretty weird. I'm going to reshape it. I'm going to make it more leafy. I don't like how that turned out. It does look kind of pumpkin leafy, but I'm not real happy with it, so I'm going to go ahead and just make it shaped like a regular leaf. Sometimes when you're making stuff, it's like, yeah, that's not how I make it look more like an apple-y kind of leaf. and cut it out so it's more pointy. Use a little bit more water from the okay. And then I'm going to put leaves generally have veining on them, right? That goes one direction. And I know this looks weird because it looks more like an apple leaf, but I kind of like it. I want it to look very leafy. So I'm cheating and making a pumpkin with an apple leaf. So then I'm going to make sure that I have enough water. If I don't, I can go to the sink in my house. I can't go to the sink in my house, so I'm just going to dip my finger in my water. I'm going to score this because I don't want it to fall off, and I don't want Karen to yell at me when it falls off. And then I'm going to make sure that I hook it onto my rattle. And I also can kind of clean it up and make sure that it has a nice texture to it. So I'm going to take my finger and just kind of smooth it out. Again, remember, you don't want to ever use too much water because sometimes when you use too much water, what ends up happening is things collapse. Water can be your enemy or your friend. It's kind of your frenemy in ceramics, and more often than not, it's the enemy version. So what's going to happen to this? So I'm pretty set to go. This looks pretty good. I like that it has a little vine. I like that it has a little weird apple leaf to it. Stem looks pretty nice, pretty organic, pretty pumpkin-y. The one thing that's going to be a problem is if I put this in the kiln right now, what's going to happen is all of the air molecules inside the little balloon, we've made a balloon, and the air molecules inside are going to heat up, just like they do when you're making tea and you put a tea kettle on the stove. The air molecules heat up and they start to collide with one another. And the hotter it gets, the faster they collide and the harder they collide into each other. And so if you don't have an air hole, if they have nowhere to go, the air molecules are going to blow up your pumpkin. This will be like a grenade if you don't punch a hole in it. So if you put this in the kiln, and I put it in just like this, there's no way for the air to exit out. So the air is just going to get hotter and hotter, and the molecules are going to collide, and then pretty soon they're going to collide so hard that they break the pumpkin. It will explode. So what you don't want to do is have that happen, because what'll happen is it'll ruin your pumpkin. But also, if your pumpkin is sitting next to someone else's and it explodes, sometimes it can cause someone else's thing to explode, their pumpkin to explode as well. So you have to make sure, for kiln safety of your own work and other people's work, that you're careful and you punch holes. A long time ago, I was making a fountain. I was taking a class. It was before I had my own kiln. And the teacher assigned us an assignment to make a fountain. And my fountain had like 100 rocks in the bottom of it. And I made the rocks myself out of this clay called porcelain. I made them just like this. I took two little tiny pinch pots, fused them together, and I thought I punched holes in all the rocks. But there was one rock that I missed, and it blew up. It was like a bullet inside the kiln when it heated up, and it smashed somebody else's fountain right next to mine. And that made me feel really bad because I ruined somebody else's project. So, and I ruined mine too. It blew a hole in the side of my fountain. On its way to breaking the other person's fountain, it broke mine first and then broke the other person's. So you don't want to have all that air, that hot air build up inside your pumpkin. So you're going to take your poking stick and you're going to poke a hole through the bottom. You don't want to do it anywhere where people are going to see it, because then that looks weird having a hole in it. So I always just poke it through the bottom. You want to make sure you go all the way in. You should be able to feel it. You'll feel when it goes all the way in because it'll slide fast, right? First you'll hit resistance and then it will slide fast. You don't want to go all the way through it and hit your paper packet with the you don't want to hit your paper packet with all the little rattle balls in it. So then you're going to kind of smooth it out because this is a big hole. This is a big poking tool. You don't need it to be that huge. So you're going to poke it through, and so it's like about that thick, right? I just kind of went like this with my finger and kind of closed it up just a little smidgen. You have to make sure it goes all the way through though. If it doesn't go all the way through into the balloon part, the air part of the balloon, your rattle will blow up. And also, if you hand this in to me and it doesn't have a hole in it, I won't fire it. So I have a little tiny drill, a little Dremel tool, and if you don't put a hole in it, I will try to put a hole into it, but it might break your rattle when I try to do that. So you want to be really careful and make sure that you punch the hole in. That should be the last thing that you do, actually the second to last thing. And then you're going to write your initials. So I'm going to put a little K on mine, a KH. Really neat at the bottom. Don't go crazy and write it all over the side. You want it to be really neat when you sign your name, right? And I'm even going to clean mine up and make it even a little bit neater because I like mine to look really nice. So now I have a little KH on there. You can barely see it. It doesn't look like KH. Really messy. Just make it nice and neat. And that's how to make a pumpkin rattle. And that's ready to go into the kiln. These take a little while to dry. And the reason why they take a while to dry is because the outside dries really fast. The inside, where you have that air pocket, the only way air is getting to that is right through this little hole. So it takes a long time for the air to get inside and dry all the inside parts, and to dry that paper that's inside, and to dry the paper that's inside, and to dry the little balls that are inside. Now all I have left is this. Okay, you should not have any clay left, and your pumpkin should not be tiny. You should have used all your clay. See how I used all my clay? In fact, I'm even going to use this little bit. I'm going to roll it, and I'm going to make one more little vine on the other side. Use all your clay. Don't save the clay. Don't make other stuff. This stuff's expensive, and I buy it with my own money because I love doing clay with kids. So please use all of your clay. Don't waste it. It's coming out of my precious pockets, pocket cash. So, and I'm using all of it. So I even made a second little vine so that I would use all of my clay. Some of you used all your clay. Delilah used all her clay when she made her face. So her face is gigantic. And then some people used like very little of their clay and their faces are tiny. So I don't know what you did with all the rest of the clay. So make sure that you're using every little bit of it. You can add like little extra decorations on it. I added 2 little grapevines on mine. When I made this one, I added little warts all over the outside. I have a little stamp, and I stamped these little, I scored each one of these and slipped them and added them on the outside. So when you hold it, it feels pretty good because you have like, you can hold on to the little warts that are on the outside. and they're all slipped and scored on hard, right? So use all your clay. Make sure you punch a hole in the bottom. If you don't punch a hole in the bottom, I will try to punch a hole for you, but by the time I get it, it will probably be dry clay, and so it will, sometimes when you punch a hole into dry clay, it cracks. Okay, and I don't want to crack your pumpkin and make you cry. Or do I? I'm just kidding. I would never want to make you cry over your pumpkin. All right, so I'm just still seeing little smoothing. Make sure that you kind of smooth it. And then also make sure that you walk away when you're done. Don't keep handling it, because the more you handle it too, the more likely it is to collapse, right? It's very easy to make them collapse. So that is how to make a clay pumpkin. It looks pretty good. I think you guys will have fun. And hopefully when we fire them, they will rattle. We'll see if you can engineer it so that they're able to rattle. Okay? So I hope you enjoyed this. I will also make a slideshow that we can walk through so that you can look at the slideshow too and know what all the steps are. Okay? Thank you for joining me. And Halloween, happy Halloween soon. Fall is here.